Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm Jose.
And we're talking about Angels with Dirty Faces, another Michael Curtiz film. We've done Casablanca and The Adventures of Robin Hood recently. This is black and white, it's from 1938, and it's a Jimmy Cagney gangster flick.
Yes, one of the most famous.
Jimmy Cagney at his height.
He's had so many heights, but yes, I think this was his first Oscar nomination.
Right. Unquestionably a star, because actually it's interesting because Humphrey Bogart's in this as well.
Yes.
And you can tell that he's not a star yet. The way that he's shot, the way that he looks, and the character he plays as well. He's a supporting character.
Yeah.
You can, but there's only one star in this.
Yeah.
And that's James Cagney.
Yeah, Bogart is the two-timing villain, basically.
That's right. Yeah.
But I'm very curious to know what you think of Cagney, because he's my favorite 1930s actor.
You can definitely see why he's unique. You can see why everyone did impressions of him, where they came from. He's all kind of like the hands out in front of him and the shoulders and a little smirk here and there. He's all these little gestures and movements that are very easy to kind of ape and mock if you want, but like they're signatures, but they're in service of something. Yeah. They have a style to them and a personality, and to some degree it's rather like what we were saying the other day about Errol Flynn in Robin Hood, which is that there's a joyfulness to everything that he does.
Yes.
That's communicated through his actions and through the look on his face.
Yes, I'm very fascinated by that because, like his performances, I think, and certainly his performance here, on the one hand, he is performing Rocky Sullivan, this gangster who's, grown up in the slums and, who's kind of partly a product of the system. And on the other hand, he is an actor performing for an audience. So, that like all the gestures that he does, on the one hand, they're meant to please, right? He's got an audience in mind when he does those things, right? And on the other hand, they're in keeping with the character. And, this idea of, performing so as to please an audience is something that I think also changes over time. So, in the 1950s, you get the studio system and the Stanislavski method, and it's all about, some idealized truth that is meant to come deep out of your psyche and experience, right? And the audience kind of gets put aside. I mean, the audience is simply meant to admire the end result, which is like a heightened realism of a role. Whereas in this one, the two things, or with Cagney, at least, the two things are not separate, and I'm fascinated by that.
I think it's something that the film makes a commentary on itself, quite deliberately. The film, and I think it's through particularly the cast of kids. What are they called?
They're called the Dead End Kids.
The Dead End Kids, right? So Cagney's character, as you say, kind of grows up in slums or in a sort of poor neighborhood in New York, is it?
Yeah.
And goes to prison for a while, comes out, goes to prison again. When he comes out, he's sort of 15, 20 years older. He's James Cagney now, and his name has kind of a legend associated with it. People have heard of Rocky Sullivan. A group of kids pickpocket him. He chases them down. They're hanging out in his former hideout when he was a kid, and this group of 8 or 9 kids becomes like a stand-in for the audience. Like they are in awe of him, right? He's Rocky Sullivan. We've heard of him. Oh my God, that's actually you. And they adore him, and they kind of want to be him. And you get to the end of the film where Rocky is executed.
He walks the last mile to the electric chair.
And his friend, the priest, has been pleading with him, saying, I want you to put on an act, is what he says. I want you to break down and start crying and being a coward on your way to the chair, because I don't want these kids feeling you'll become a martyr to them. Yeah. Effectively, is what he's saying. If you're Rocky the gangster who whatever, and he goes, no, I'm not going to do that. but then he actually does, and like he's not putting it on. He's actually breaking down and begging for his life and pleading for mercy on his way to the chair. And the very final scene of the film is the kids reading the paper that says he died yellow. And they ask the priest, is it true? And he says, yes, it's true. And you can tell this is a Hays Code ending sort of thing.
Yes.
Like it moralizes quite heavily.
Yes.
But I think the film, with the characters of the kids, is talking about sort of glorification of violence and gangsters and kind of hero worship.
Yes.
In quite an interesting way, in quite a subversive way in a way, sort of deconstructing the role that Jimmy Cagney is supposed to play, what you're supposed to like about him.
But that's an interesting way of putting it. So you think that Rocky Sullivan is the same kind of, or similar kind of star figure with all the hero worship involved and so on, that James Cagney, the actor, is to the audience?
Kind of.
That's a very interesting thing.
See what I mean?
Yes.
And then, I it's a film that I always come back to, but I'll mention it again, The Wolf of Wall Street.
Yes.
The Scorsese film. There's a similar critique of the audience and their expectations and their desires. It's also having your cake and eating it kind of thing, because throughout the entire film you're getting the pleasures of watching James Cagney be charming and be kind of dirty and cheeky and anti-authority, and then at the end you get to kind of moralize that actually he was a bad guy who got his comeuppance sort of thing, and you're not supposed to think of him as a hero, but you are. Yeah. So the film is having its cake and eating it in a way. And like I said, the reason I will always come back to The Wolf of Wall Street is because it's the one film I think really doesn't and follows through on its promise to attack the audience.
I think it's worth stating that though James Cagney and Pat O'Brien are top billed, this is an all-star cast in the sense that Anne Sheridan, who plays, the could have been girlfriend from The Old Neighborhood, was also a star by this period. And George Bancroft had been a big star in the silent films in the early 30s. And of course, the Dead End Kids, the reason why they're called the Dead End Kids is because they'd been in a hit play on Broadway, right? And they'd already made a film for Goldwyn with Bogart, I think maybe called Dead End. So, they would have been the equivalent of teen stars or something. They would have been recognizable by the audience, each of those kids.
Their name is up on it's a big name at the start. The Dead End Kids, you have to know who they are.
Yeah, so they were kind of an attraction, right? Which is something that's kind of, I suppose, lost to us, but that you could see the film setting it up, but what did you think of the film overall? I mean, this is now our third Curtiz film. How would you rate it?
I might rate it above The Adventures of Robin Hood. Just because I think the characters are more interesting and I had better time and maybe the setting. I mean, I didn't dislike The Adventures of Robin Hood, but I think Robin Hood, the pleasures of it are more sort of contextual. What's interesting about Robin Hood to me is the context of the time and the differences between sort of the way you would imagine such a film being made now to then. It's very much of its time, which is not to say that this one isn't. I mean, this is clearly of its time. They don't make films this way anymore.
Yes.
But in terms of an ease of sort of getting into it and attaching myself to the characters and that sort of thing, I found this one kind of much easier to get along with in that respect.
Okay. Yes, I don't. I think this is more dated. Whereas, I think to me Robin Hood is an all-around great film. I could still watch it with all the pleasures. It's like a kind of an innocent film, and in a way it's for a family audience, right? So kind of, but I love the look, I love the score, I love Flynn, I love the kind of boy's own story element of the action and the romance, and I think to me that holds up very well. Whereas, this, much as I love it, it doesn't quite grab me in the same way. Though at the end I was moved, actually, surprisingly. You know, like there was that close up of Pat O'Brien, and I got a little moist.
Yeah, the relationship between those two is interesting. I mean, it's playing on again, this is kind of playing on a moralistic level. I mean, the film is called Angels with Dirty Faces, so the idea that like a kind of goodness underneath, sort of thing. I mean, it seems to me that's really referring to the kids.
I think it's referring to the kids, but also to the Pat O'Brien and James Cagney characters, because I think what the film doesn't bring out enough at the end, but we see it at the beginning, is that actually James Cagney took the rap, right? You know, for what was also the priest's crime, and not only that, he wouldn't have been caught if he hadn't stopped to get him out of the train, the running train that was, you know. So you know, the film is basically arguing in a way, you know, that conditions are bad, but really all kids are good if you give them, you know, a chance and show them the right path.
Yeah, there's an interesting thing that it's doing where so the two of them were stealing pens off this train when they were in their teen years, and they get spotted. The police chase them down. Jerry gets away, and Rocky doesn't. And then kind of years down the line, you see that Jerry has become a priest. And so you get the feeling that like the film is setting up this thing of like, well, the good guy, the bad guy in a way, but it's not. It's you know, these guys have a relationship, and when they meet again years down the line, they embrace and they hug and they almost sort of talk about old times sort of thing. Like there's no kind of animosity and.
Can I elaborate a bit on that? Because I think what you're saying is so interesting, because this is a world, and I would imagine analogous to, you know, some black neighborhoods in the U.S. at the moment, where actually having done jail time is no measure of your goodness or your value as a person. Yeah, that it's expected, you know, that kind of people from this neighborhood, or a lot of people from this neighborhood, will have done jail time for many reasons that actually are not really a measure whether they're a good person or a bad person. And I found that interesting.
I said to you, you know, what they've done is nick some pens off a train and then try and run from the cops, which is not the worst crime in the world, and they are kids.
Yes.
And you see three separate sort of. Well, I'm not sure if the crimes are separate or if they're all stem from that particular crime where Rocky gets 2 years for petty larceny, and he gets 3 years for something else, and he gets 4.5 years for something else, and that all happens in the same montage. So I'm not sure if that's saying he came out then went back in, then came out then went back in for different crimes.
I think what it's saying is that once you're put into the system as a criminal, you're doomed. You end up a criminal.
It is, but I'm just saying I'm not sure if it was saying that he got an incredibly excessive sentence for this one crime, or if it was a number of crimes that he committed.
I got the feeling that the montage is all about you know, him having been caught for the pens, and you know, sets him on the path to crime.
Yeah, I think that is ultimately what it's saying. And it's not and it's a long time before he sees Jerry again and they reconnect. And there are some interesting lines, a couple of lines from Jerry, where he has the holy sort of perspective on things now in a way, where he says, "There, but for the grace of God go I," and he talks about this is right towards the end of the film, which I found quite a moving line, where he says something like, "Let's pray for a boy who couldn't run as fast as me," or something like that. Yes. You know, which basically says it's a bit of luck, basically, that put him in this place and put me in this place.
Yes,
which is subtle and really moving. And actually, when I talk about the ending being kind of moralistic and moralising a bit too heavily, it does a bit, but not there. That's actually quite subtle. And you know, the moralising is about saying, you know, you've enjoyed watching him be a gangster, and now he's got his comeuppance, which is a bit cheeky, a bit cheap. But the aspect, the relationship between those two, and the subtleties in it are moving and quite thoughtful.
What did you think? There are two things that I want to ask you about. One is the direction in general, and then the direction of the action in particular.
In terms of direction, I guess it comes down to performance. Like Cagney's performance is privileged above everything, and there are some great sort of bits of business with, like I said to you, almost like Three Stooges type stuff with slapping up and down here and there.
Yes.
And you know, the basketball game, for instance. And I said to you at the time, like, this is not the most exciting basketball game I've ever seen. It drags a bit, and it's a bit all over the place. But the business that happens once Cagney takes over refereeing and starts just slapping players and tripping them up, you know, is enormously good fun. And I think everything about the direction kind of privileges his performance and his ability to interact with people, interact with scenes. What was the other thing you asked? The action in particular.
The action in particular, yeah.
I'll tell you what I did like. What I thought, what I noticed was in the scene where Rocky is holed up in the building and he's getting surrounded by the cops, and you know that this is it for him. How dishevelled his look is. Like he's no longer pretty, you know. And he's no longer charming, really, either. He's stressed, and his hair's all over the place, and he's dripping with sweat, and sort of surrounded by smoke as well, because they've thrown in tear gas. So you get this sense of like hell, like an inferno in this building that's kind of enveloping him, engulfing him, which I thought was great.
I thought that was great. And actually, I think there are scenes in the film that to me are just fantastic. The opening shot, right? I mean, when has an opening shot evoked a whole way of life, you know, as clearly as this one? It's like, you know,
the sweep across
the camera kind of cranes down, you know, across this neighborhood and really lets you see it, right? Like, you know, so I mean, there's the name of the street. There's women putting out the washing, you know, from the tenements, you know, then kind of it pans down, you see all the shops, the carts with the fruit, the people milling, you know, and then it takes you to Rocky and Jerry as young men. And actually one of the ways in which, you know, James Cagney is so imitable, though at the same time so unique, is that, of course, the kid playing James Cagney as a young man is doing James Cagney, right? Like, exactly. And he does it beautifully, right? You know instantly that it's meant to be James Cagney as a young man. Yeah. But I thought that shot, you know, it just evokes a world, a way of life, you know, a fictional world that's like a world where this action can happen, you know, a world that is also recognizable, like what audiences must have imagined New York to have been at the turn of the century. Right, and then actually that shot gets rhymed, so that, you know, when Rocky comes back to the old neighborhood, you get a similar shot, right? But then, like 10 years later or 8 years later, whatever it's meant to be, you know, and so actually you see that there's more cars in the neighborhood and rather than carts, right, and so on. Yeah, but it kind of, I thought, I mean, to me that's just amazing, and actually you think it must have cost a fortune. Right? Yeah, like, you know, because there's like 500 extras in it or whatever. Like it's just amazing. It's
a real showing off first shot. It reminded me of Do the Right Thing.
Ah, right. Yes.
Interestingly, which I mean, I don't remember if that had a particular similar shot. I don't think it did. But the immediate sense you get of the busyness of this neighborhood and the kind of variety of people within it.
Yes.
And that sort of thing. And also the idea that there's so much activity that like things could happen. You don't know quite what.
I think Curtiz is amazing with the camera. There was also the shootout at the end with Humphrey Bogart, where, you know, the shootout begins, you know, and then the camera focuses on Cagney through a mirror. So actually what you're seeing is his face. You're not actually seeing him, you know, do the gun work. And I thought that was so brilliant. And then also at the very end, when they're, you know, in prison and the electric chair scene is about to go, that's really when you get, you know, all the shots with the shadows, right? So, you know, which
actually shadows.
Yeah. Well, you know, once you notice. And actually, the thing is that he uses them very sparingly here, right? So actually, that doesn't come into play until the prison scenes. And then you get kind of all of these actions, the cop reflected through the prison bar as you see Cagney lounging in his cell bed, right? The electric chair overhanging the audience as Cagney goes through the last mile. And then, of course, you actually, his struggle or his being afraid, you're only shown it in shadow, right? Or inserts of hands, right? Which I thought that was incredibly clever, and also being dramatic and adding to the mood and everything, but also incredibly clever because, kind of by focusing it on the shadows and by not showing us Cagney's face, it inserts this moment of doubt, is Rocky Yella or is he performing for the priest, as the priest asked him? And actually, I think
it's not completely clear, but my instinct is that he is genuinely begging for his life.
Right. Well, by not showing us his face, it just creates that doubt.
You're seeing it, but not seeing it.
Yeah.
And it happens off screen. So you're seeing an impression of what's happening in your imagination. Kind of is allowed to fill in things, and it's quite evocative. I think it's great. There is a shot slightly earlier than the prison scenes when he gets the drop on Jerry and he leads him. He has a gun in his back and leads him out the building. That transitions into huge shadows on the wall, which again, but that's when the film is. That's when you really have if you know these kind of stories, then you're going like, this is it now. The guy is doomed, sort of thing. Yeah. That's when that's all really kicking in, like the end of his story.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the action, did it work for you? You mentioned
largely,
something about how the guns are...
Yeah, the gun work it's very, very 30s. It's very cinematic, but you point out particularly it's very 30s, which is that the sound effect is that like really classic, sort of 30s sound, and the way that Cagney shoots. I don't know if I particularly noticed it with anyone else shooting, but definitely Cagney is as he takes a shot with his pistol, he punches. So he thrusts the gun forward as he takes the shot, and I said to you, like, that's no way to shoot. You'll miss every time. but there's an energetic thing to it. Like, I don't know how to put it really. It's just it's such a style thing.
Yes.
That it's like a cops and robbers. It's like the way kids play with guns.
Yes.
When you're a kid and you have little toy guns. Pew pew. Yes. Like cowboys and Indians. Right.
I think that's so interesting. I was reading this piece by Robert Warshaw, which is like, the gangster's tragic hero, and kind of he was saying that, kind of the gangster, even more than the Westerner or anything like that, is kind of, an American figure where American concerns are played out, really. Because the gangster's a tragic hero because he's got to die, right? But on the other hand, he's tragic because the impulse in America is that you've got to stand out from the crowd. You've got to be successful, right? But for the gangster, in order to stand out for the crowd and to be successful means you have to die, right? Like, so kind of, you're doomed. And I thought it was so interesting because this film in particular, it does that, and actually I think it underlines the tragic element of it because you do see all these societal forces. You do get the sense throughout, there's a line where he says, "Oh, my heart was ripped out a long time ago. I have no heart." But actually, you can tell that isn't true, really, So it is kind of, in many ways about how capitalism plays out in America, and it is all about money and violence, and the films show a very corrupt world. So, kind of the gangsters get punished, but all the politicians are just as corrupt. The newspapers don't dare do anything about them. I mean, it's a very corrupt world that these films show us, really, and of course the gangster's the hero in this world, right? So I kind of, I think it's a very interesting genre, and the concerns that it kind of works out are kind of continued interest. And of course, this film, in a certain way, is like a template for, so many of the gangster films that followed, right? Like this idea of coming from the wrong side of the tracks, of, the priest and the priest and the gangster kind of is now almost a cliche. It takes on different forms, in different films. but this kind of set the template for all of them, and it's kind of nice to see a film, even though kind of I don't think to me personally it doesn't hold up as well as Casablanca or Robin Hood. It's still fascinating to see how potent everything that it does, remains, and how the film has been used as a template in so many other films that I can't even remember now, but you see these things kind of played out in gangster film after gangster film after gangster film.
Yeah. I think the interesting thing about this film, I don't know how well it applies more widely to gangster films and to noir, but in this film in particular, like the difference between right and wrong is never really in question. The difference between good and bad, it's very black and white. But your like where your allegiance lies is in question.
Yes.
And just so you kind of you go there, you go to the cinema to see this film because you want to partake of the pleasures of gangsters.
Yes.
And so you're very aware that these are bad guys, and whatever they're up to, you shouldn't get up to yourself.
Yes.
But
there's also that
where
thing.
Go on.
Sorry. There's also the thing that it could so easily be you.
Up to a point. I don't think there's. I think like you could be the kids. I think there's a suggestion of like these kind of, they come from anywhere, and there is that idea that we mentioned of there, but for the grace of God go I. I got away from the cops and he didn't, and it was just that bit of luck that sent us on our different ways. But there is also a sense of like you can't be Jimmy Cagney. Only Jimmy Cagney can be Jimmy Cagney.
True. No, there's all of that, and actually I think I think it's very interesting though, because most of us have never met a gangster in our lives. I mean, most of us have never even been in a crime scene or anything connected with crime, and yet almost all of the conventions of the American gangster film are kind of known to almost everybody, I would say. So kind of it's interesting to me why they continue, why they remain so potent, and this film in particular. I mean, you can see why it had the impact. It's so well made. It's incredibly well made, and it's made with style and dash, and it looks beautiful. And actually some of the shots are beautiful. The lighting, throughout is kind of it's excellent. It's really kind of
it's high melodrama.
Yeah,
really.
Well,
absolutely. Certainly when you get to the end and he's screaming for his life, and as you say, it all goes into shadow, and the there's no way out, there's no escape, as there kind of never is in these things. I think that's a real staple of noir. You're in a dead end. There's absolutely no escape, and it's all going to end for you. That is kind of the height of melodrama of this era in a way. It's not romantic, but
in fact, in the trade press, they were advertised as melodramas. I mean, it's only later that somehow melodrama became associated with women. I mean, gangster films were, a Meller with Cagney or whatever. And
I think it leads into saying, so this is the last point I want to make, which I think you might be getting onto as well, which is one thing that I like to think about when I'm watching older movies is how would you cast them these days? So with Casablanca, we were talking about, I think we suggested sort of John Hamm, perhaps.
Oops.
Another cake is ready?
Another cake is ready, but it can wait 5 minutes, so let's continue.
So I suggested maybe John Hamm would be good as Rick in Casablanca, and I suggested Diane Kruger for Ilsa. And it's good fun to think of that, but I think they fit quite well. I can't think of anybody who could play Rocky. I can't think of anyone who really is a modern day James Cagney.
Well, I think he's unique. I mean, I think he is my favorite of the 1930s actors and he, of course, he continued to have a career into the 60s, and he did Ragtime with Milos Forman in the 80s. And I like him. I always love him, actually. But in the 1930s, when he's young, he's got this energy, right? I just love watching him. And actually, some of the things you watch him do would be completely unacceptable now. You know, the way he bashes those kids around, like, you know, kind of social services would be on him in a second, right? And also the gender things, because, you know, he slaps women around, kind of, you know, not in this film, but in earlier 1930s
A little bit he does.
films.
He slaps a girl right at the start.
Yeah.
She slaps him back.
That's right.
But you're right.
But, you know, so kind of all of those things are, you know, maybe conventions of the period, but they're unacceptable now. So, you know, to watch him now is not an undiluted pleasure. There are things that are troublesome and problematic. But still, you know, I love him, what he does, and also what he stands for. You know, because actually I think there is kind of an underlying kind of democratic core about Cagney, you know. He's always standing up for the working man. He's always a man of the people. He's always like somebody, you know, from the lower classes and who's not ashamed of it, you know, and who demands justice and fairness. I mean, actually, a lot of the plot around this particular film, even though it doesn't deploy those aspects of Cagney's persona very much, still has to do with the basic fairness of they made this deal and, you know, the Bogart character's watching on it and it's condom, right?
Sure. So it would be a stretch to say he's kind of socially conscious, though. I mean, I don't think he particularly cares about his fellow man. I mean, he's not a Robin Hood figure.
He donated $100,000 to the creation of the club for the kids. He didn't have to do that. You know, in another film, you know, he could have donated it to the Anne Sheridan character to, you know, to cushion her in old age or whatever, right? I mean, there are.
But I mean, I think the priest has a point when he goes on his crusade against the three of them for running the city.
Sure, it's not like Jimmy the Gent where you know he's saying you know the NRA, da da da. So it's not like that.
I mean, he wants fairness in his dealings. Do you know what I mean? Like,
well,
it's not about fairness for the society.
Yeah, but fairness in his dealings, fairness in his world, and fairness in the world are hard to distinguish through this. I mean, so for example, you know, there are other stars from whom that's not even an issue, you know. So kind of, I think it's significant that, you know, even in this film in which it's not about that, you know, kind of, there's still a core of that.
Yeah, a bit.
Okay. Did you like it?
I did think, but I guess I was also just trying to think specifically, like, of examples of actors.
Well, I think
genuinely, I came up with, Jack Nicholson has the anti-authority aspect and the kind of look and a bit of charm, but he's not quick enough.
No.
I thought maybe Robert Downey Jr. is the only actor I could think of who actually is quick enough. But I don't think he's quite right.
No, yeah.
Vincent Cassel or Mel Gibson have aspects,
No.
but actually, like, I can't. When I look at other films and other actors, I can always think of an analog somewhere.
Yes.
They're not perfect, but they're always an interesting.
I think there's.
I can't think of anyone who can play Rocky.
I think all of the greats, though they might be imitable, they're also irreplaceable. Like no one can do their stuff, you know. And I think Cagney's one of them. I think he's one of the all-time greats, and. You know, his success, or, you know, the film is 80 years old, right? And kind of, you know, and I'm still like amazed by him and love him and so on. And part of the reason is because, you know, nobody has replaced that. Nobody, you know, there's no one else like him. And unlike other actors, he doesn't have 10 masterpieces attached to his IMDb credits, right? He's actually kind of made very few films that would hold up without him, right? Like, you know, kind of the reason to see all of these 1930s gangster films are because he's in it. Otherwise, some of them are really quite run-of-the-mill. This is one of his very best, right? And it's very good, you know, but it's not one of the great masterpieces of the cinema, is it?
No.
So, kind of, I think...
It's good, though. It is good.
It's very good. So I think that's kind of all of those things are, you know, what makes Cagney great, really. That, you know, that people like me are still eager to see his films, in spite of knowing that, you know, kind of they're not necessarily the great works of American classic cinema, for the most part. I mean, he's done some good ones, you know, but generally, kind of, you know, he's got a lot fewer great films than, you know, like Katharine Hepburn or James Stewart has a ton, Henry Fonda has a ton, you know, etc. I think this is something kind of very interesting.
So it's almost like James Cagney is one of the greatest actors who only played like B movies.
No, he didn't do B movies. They were A movies, or certainly later on they were A movies. You know, but he didn't work with the greatest directors.
Right.
You know, they're not masterpieces. I mean, you know, some Hepburn films, whether you like Hepburn or you don't like Hepburn, you're seeing, you know, because it's a classic of screwball comedy, like Bring Up Baby or whatever. Cagney has very few films like that. I mean, you know, if you're seeing them because of Cagney, right? You know, Cary Grant has, or James Stewart has, you know, all-time classic westerns, all-time, you know, classic screwballs. Like, you know, there's a lot of reasons to see James Stewart films, whether you like James Stewart or not, right? Kind of.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Cagney doesn't have very many of those. You know.
Cagney is the main draw, and in most cases the only draw.
Yeah,
for most of his films.
And he's worth it. His films are worth seeking out for him. Part of the reason why he was so rebellious, you know, he walked out on Warner Brothers half a dozen times because he thought they weren't paying enough. I mean, he's somebody who knew his own worth. He tried setting up his own production company. You know, in the early 30s, he made films on his own with his brother, but, you know, because of the conditions of the studio system and whatever, they were very cheapo stuff, you know, kind of released by, and then he came back to Warner Brothers, right? I mean, this is one of the films he did just after he'd, you know, been in independent production with his own brother, and kind of things weren't working out. This is a project that he started, Angels with Dirty Faces, and they came back to Warner Brothers to do it on a different contract, right? So I think part of the reason, there are reasons why he didn't, you know, I'm sure kind of directors, you know, sought him out. They certainly did later. But also, you know, when you're that big a star, you know, and with the star and the genre connect, it was almost like guaranteed money in the bank. Like, you know, you put Cagney in a gangster film, and it would have to be really bad to lose money, right?
Yeah.
You know, so
it's interesting though, isn't it? Because like everyone else of this kind of era is associated with other people. Actors are associated with other actors and maybe directors who they worked with a lot. And Cagney isn't. He's associated with a genre.
Yes,
he's associated with the gangster film.
What are the films he's most famous for? Well, Yankee Doodle Dandy. Well, have you seen Yankee Doodle Dandy? I mean, you know, the American patriotism at the end. I mean, it's still a very effective film and it works, but you know, it's not a great film, right? Like, I think this is really one of his finest. Yeah, and White Heat with Raoul Walsh. I mean, it's not that he doesn't have great films, but you know, kind of they're very small in comparison to other great stars of the era.
I liked
it. The cake is about to burn, so the last question is, did you like it and do you recommend?
Yes. Yes and yes. I think it's more interesting than Robin Hood for me.
Okay.
I think it lulls less as well.
Okay,
although it does lull a bit.
That's great and useful. Great and useful to know.
Well, I'm just saying, you know, if you're looking for an actual like recommendation whether you should watch it or not.
No, I am. Yeah. I am.
Enjoyable.
Thank you very much for listening. We are Eavesdropping at the Movies, and we are on
iTunes, YouTube, and SoundCloud to listen to. On social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter, and we're eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. And also, we're watching one more Curtiz.
Yes, Mildred Pierce.
We're watching Mildred Pierce, and then we get to watch some films that I want to watch.
Yes. Let me check the cake.